The following is an EWTN special presentation.
It's now a pleasure for me to introduce Peter Cameron, who is the editor-in-chief of Magnificat, and I'm sure most of you have seen Magnificat before. Just beautiful rendition of, putting together our Liturgy of the Hours, putting together spiritual reflections and readings, and of course the art on the front cover is always really stunning. And so if you don't subscribe, I just beg of you, get on their website and subscribe. The booklet comes to you every month. It's really, truly beautiful, very handy for prayer. But Peter Cameron is also an award-winning playwright, and he is also the founder of the Blackfriars Repertory Theater in New York. So he's, of course, keeping himself a little bit busy. He's published 10 books, the latest of which is Made for Love, Loved by God. And he is also the director and chairman of homiletics for St. Joseph Seminary in Dunwoody, New York. The guy obviously has very little breathing time, but he's made some time to be with us, and we're sure glad to have Peter Cameron here with us. Would you please welcome him? Failed to mention he's a Dominican. We still love him.
I love ecumenical events. The first time I ever laid eyes on Magnificat, almost 20 years ago, I was visiting the Albertinum, the International Dominican Priory in Fribourg, Switzerland. My friend Father Romanes Cesario showed me a copy of the original French edition of the magazine that he had happened on. And the instant I saw it, I said, "This has to be in English." Now, that was not because of my French, which, believe me, is worse than terrible, but rather it was because I was completely struck by the extraordinary beauty of Magnificat. And beauty in the sense that St. Thomas Aquinas understands it, noting beauty's three properties. First, there is integrity, which means that a thing that is beautiful possesses a completeness, a wholeness and richness of perfection that appeals to us and that elicits a satisfying pleasure. I was impressed that this little book contained the prayers and scripture readings for Mass every day, an adaptation of the Liturgy of the Hours, meditations from great spiritual masters, lives of the saints, profound essays, devotions, exquisite artwork, and so much more. It seemed like nothing was missing. There was a wondrous fullness to it all. A second thing that instantaneously attracted me to Magnificat was its superb proportion. For St. Thomas, proportion refers to the harmonious arrangement and placement of all of a beautiful thing's various parts, both among themselves and in relation to the whole. Proportion is what produces order and what makes a work organic. It unites disparate elements so as to create a common center, what we would refer to in art as form. So, for example, Magnificat would not be so beautiful if it were the size of a telephone book. Its smallness, its compactness, its portability, the fact that it fits in your hand and that its pages lie open on their own is a big part of its appeal. You could even say it's kind of cute. Added to that is the color and the onion-skinned quality of the paper, along with the fonts and the layout and the ink colors and the binding and the not too thick thickness of it. It all combines to a just right sort of proportionality that is immediately appreciable. The proof of which is, if you tinker with even one of those elements, Magnificat just doesn't seem like Magnificat anymore. As a little aside, sometimes we receive suggestions from our readers telling us about new features that we think they think we should include in Magnificat. But if we followed through on those suggestions and added everything that people ask for, Magnificat would be as thick as a brick and not beautiful anymore. And third, there is brilliance or radiance about something beautiful. A beautiful thing is endowed with a splendor by which the thing's form shines forth. It starts with the cover of Magnificat, as Father Spitzer said, that just hooks you and draws you in. There's something alluring about the sublime artwork on Magnificat's cover. Some of our readers have told us that they are so taken by the beautiful images that they find on Magnificat of our Lord and of the Blessed Mother that they feel moved to kiss the cover. That artwork is selected personally each month by the publisher, Mr. Pierre-Marie Dumont, who is also the creator of Magnificat. But once you open the cover, the brilliance is amplified by, as the reader discovers the glory of the liturgy, united with the luminous wisdom of the saints and that of mystical writers, both ancient and new. Beauty stirs us to wonder. It moves the beholder to contemplation. And the cause of so much misery infecting the world today is the utter absence of contemplation. Beauty is the mission of Magnificat, that is to say, it is the mission to generate that contemplation without which life does not make sense. Magnificat exists to be beautiful in the sense that J.R.R. Tolkien understood it. All my own perception of beauty, both in majesty and simplicity, is founded upon Our Lady. That's why it's called Magnificat. So the great challenge facing Magnificat is to keep that beauty going. But why give such priority to beauty? Why be so dedicated to art? The answer has nothing to do with the highbrow or elitism or the effete. Rather, in the opinion of many, it is a matter of life or death. The French convert and literary genius Léon Blois, writing in 1947, remarked, "The Church has for 300 years lain in a death agony. There remains capable of reviving us only the she-wolf of art." Now, this is not a new insight. It was Plato who said that beauty draws our heart out of accommodation with daily routine and keeps it from decaying into nothingness. St. John Paul II, in his letter to artists, quotes the Council Fathers at Vatican II. He says, quoting them, he writes, "This world in which we live needs beauty in order not to sink into despair." And John Paul himself then adds emphatically, "The Church needs art in order to communicate the message entrusted to her by Christ." But we have forgotten about this art and beauty, or we have chosen to ignore it or to scorn it because we are dubious or worse, embarrassed about beauty being so key. We don't want beauty to do our heavy lifting. We'd rather rely on something stalwart and rugged and brawny, something more hale and hearty than art. I don't know any greater authority on the theology of beauty and art, at least in modern times, than Father Hans Urs von Balthasar. In his monumental Theological Aesthetics, he writes, "Our situation today shows that beauty demands for itself at least as much courage and decision as do truth and goodness, and she will not allow herself to be separated and banned from her two sisters." Then he says, "We can be sure that whoever sneers at beauty's name as if she were the ornament of a bourgeois past can no longer pray and soon will no longer be able to love." And isn't that the very predicament, the exact crisis we contend with today? Von Balthasar continues, "In a world without beauty, the good also loses its attractiveness. In a world that no longer has enough confidence in itself to affirm the beautiful, the proofs of the truth have lost their cogency. Logic is itself a mechanism that no longer captivates anyone. The very conclusions are no longer conclusive. You've all heard rigorously logical preaching. But because it lacked even a flicker of beauty, you weren't captivated. You didn't find the preacher's conclusions conclusive or even mildly compelling. And where were you during that homily? I know, because I was there with you. On a beach, in Honolulu, in a hammock under a palm tree, drinking a drink from a coconut with a little umbrella poking out of it. Because if the preacher is not going to give me an encounter with beauty in his preaching, I am going to give myself one. Because I need beauty always. As the servant of God, Monsignor Luigi Giussani put it, without beauty, God does not appear. But how we resist this. Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger, before he was His Holiness Pope Benedict XVI, wrote, a theologian who does not love art, poetry, music, and nature can be dangerous. Blindness and deafness toward the beautiful are not incidental. They necessarily are reflected in his theology. In another place he says, the church is to transform, improve, humanize the world. But how can she do that if at the same time she turns her back on beauty, which is so closely allied to love? For together, beauty and love form the true consolation in the world, bringing it as near as possible to the world of the resurrection. This is why, as Benedict XVI, the Pope said, the beautiful wounds, and this is exactly how it summons man to his final destiny. We are wounded by beauty. In my Catholic life, I don't know how many times I have actually been wounded by beauty, but I know I've been bludgeoned by the lack of it. As Dana Gioia says in his must-read essay, nowhere is Catholicism's artistic decline more painfully evident than in its newer churches. The graceless architecture, the formulaic painting, the banal sculpture, the ill-conceived and poorly performed music, and the cliché-ridden and shallow homilies. This is why our Holy Father, Pope Francis, in his apostolic exhortation, Evangelii Gaudium, says simply but very pointedly, the church grows by attraction. And Pope Francis summons the church to attend to what he calls the via pulchritudinis, the way of beauty. He declares that a formation in the via pulchritudinis ought to be part of our effort to pass on the faith. That formation constitutes, he says, a renewed esteem for beauty that serves as a means of touching the human heart. Which is why, as the Pope instructs us, we must be bold enough to discover new signs and new symbols, including those unconventional modes of beauty, which may mean little to the evangelizers, yet prove particularly attractive for others. And then Pope Francis gives this direction. Each particular church should encourage the use of the arts in evangelization. Now, why? What is it specifically that makes art and beauty so special? I would mention just three things that are really vital for Magnificat. First, beauty is indispensable because of its ability to point us to something more. In reflecting on the dynamic of art and beauty, Monsignor Giussani wrote, the more something is beautiful, the more it refers one on to something else. The greater the art, The more it flings wide open desire, it is a sign of something else. What is this something else to which beauty refers? I think the 20th century French playwright Jean Anouilh says it all, where he writes, "Beauty is one of the rare things that do not lead to doubt of God." For example, in 1851, Herman Melville published his masterpiece, Moby Dick. He dedicated the work to his fellow writer friend, Nathaniel Hawthorne. Hawthorne read all 700 pages of the novel in just 2 days, and then he promptly sent Melville this message: "Knowing you persuades me more than the Bible of our immortality." It is a witness like this that prompts St. John Paul II in his letter to artists to state, "True beauty transfigures matter, opening the human soul to the sense of the eternal." Later in 2011, at a general audience, Pope Benedict XVI carried through on that theme by claiming, "Art is capable of making visible our need to go beyond what we see, and it reveals our thirst for infinite beauty, for God." And to illustrate his point, Pope Benedict used an example from his own personal experience. He recalled attending a concert of Johann Sebastian Bach in Munich. He recounted, "After the last piece of music, I felt, not by reasoning, but in my heart, that what I heard had conveyed to me truth, something of the truth of that great composer's faith, and this pressed me to praise and thank the Lord." As St. John Paul II says in his letter to artists, "Beauty stirs that hidden nostalgia for God." And the author Charles Baudelaire attests to this insight when he says, "When an exquisite poem brings tears to the eyes, these tears are testimony of a nature exiled in the imperfect and desiring to take possession, even on this earth, of a revealed paradise." So everything that we select for Magnificat intends, even if just a little, to reveal paradise so that the readers will desire, before all else, to take possession of it. We firmly espouse a conviction that St. John Paul II asserted in his letter to artists. Art remains a kind of bridge to religious experience. Insofar as it seeks the beautiful, art is by its nature a kind of appeal to the mystery. And we are very grateful for the reassertion of this truth by Pope Francis in Evangelii Gaudium. Every expression of true beauty can, he says, be acknowledged as a path leading to an encounter with the Lord Jesus. Second, beauty overcomes our resistance. Monsignor Giussani once remarked that the motivation for saying yes to something that comes into our life, defeating all preconceptions, is beauty. If we are honest with ourselves, we will admit just how much our preconceptions hold us back and keep us from growing and flourishing in life. We're very attached to them. But the last thing that makes us want to surrender our preconceptions is someone else's conceptions. Rather, what gets me past my stubbornly held preconceptions is beauty. For me, one of the most striking examples of this, and I've used it before, is the beginning of the 1986 film, The Mission. You remember that? So an 18th century Jesuit missionary is sent to South America to evangelize the savage Guarani people. How does one do this? The priest has an idea. He decides to sit down on a rock and to play his oboe. The Guarani warriors approach, brandishing spears and bows and arrows, but they become so captivated by the beauty of the music that they lower their weapons, take the priest by the hand, and lead him with them into their village and to a new life of faith. Magnificat's evangelical use of art aims basically at one thing: to get people to drop their weapons and to take beauty by the hand. As the papal preacher Father Raniero Cantalamessa has observed, the basic sin of egoism cannot be removed through observance of the law, but only through reestablishing the state of friendship. That state that existed at the beginning between God and man. Reestablishing the state of friendship is a work of beauty. For as Pope Benedict XVI stated in Sacramentum Caritatis, the truest beauty is the love of God. Everything in Magnificat means to engender this friendship. And third, beauty makes us want to be our true selves. The philosopher Jacques Maritain wrote, "The intelligence delights in the beautiful because in the beautiful it finds itself again and recognizes itself and makes contact with its own light." Von Balthasar once commented, "In the experiences of extraordinary beauty, we are able to grasp a phenomenon in its distinctiveness that otherwise remains veiled." This is especially true when it comes to that veiled phenomenon known as the human being. It is as beauty that Christ reveals man to himself. In the words of Pope Benedict XVI, the beautiful is knowledge in a superior form, since it arouses man to the real greatness of the truth. Beauty shows us that we can be better people, educating us and imbuing us with the desire to change. A character in a play by Karawatiwa entitled Our God's Brother, in one scene is reflecting on the power of art. He makes this remark, "A painting can dissect a man." That's what governs the selection of the paintings in Magnificat, used for the cover as well as for the art essay in the back. But isn't this all rather romantic and idealistic? I mean, can it actually work? And the answer is yes. And the reason we can be sure is because it already has throughout history. For example, not long ago I came across a review of the book The Birth of Purgatory by the medievalist Jacques Le Goff. The review is by Robert Moore, who finds the book particularly compelling for this reason, so I'm quoting him. He writes, "Most remarkably, even after the scholastics had developed the concepts and the church had decided on the actuality of purgatory, purgatory did not achieve the kind of concreteness that it possessed in the centuries that followed and continued well into the 19th century until Dante wrote the second part of the Divine Comedy, in which Dante is led through purgatory by Virgil. Incredibly, it was this creative work of fiction and not the theologians of the church that solidified in the imaginations of medieval Christians the notions of purgatory. Le Goff shows that until the time when Dante wrote the Purgatory in the early 14th century, there was surprisingly little consensus about the nature of purgatory. After Dante, however, there would be widespread consensus on the details concerning purgatory." God bless you. And then Robert Moore concludes, "Surely this is one of the few instances in church history where a creative artist bears the primary credit for theological dogma." The second is a kind of anti-example, and it has to do with the apparitions of the Blessed Virgin Mary to Bernadette Soubirous in Lourdes. So you all have in your minds a picture of Our Lady of Lourdes, right? She immediately comes to mind. So let me ask you, in that image that you hold in your head, how old is Our Lady? And how tall is she? There were many interviews conducted with St. Bernadette concerning the 18 Marian apparitions she witnessed, and those interviews were recorded. In an exhaustive study by Ruth Harris entitled Lourdes, Body and Spirit in the Secular Age, the historian highlights the tension between how Bernadette perceived Our Lady versus the way the world wanted to portray her. Ruth Harris writes, Bernadette described the apparition as bien mignonette, an expression that sought to capture her tiny delicacy. She was a little girl, not even an adolescent. Bernadette said she resembled a local child of about 12. By Bernadette's account, the figure was very small, no bigger than her own diminutive 4.5 feet. However, an onslaught of commentators refused to accept such an unorthodox description of the Blessed Virgin Mary. Harris explains, the first newspaper described the apparition as a dame, a lady, and the word demoiselle, or unmarried girl, virtually never appeared in print thereafter. Well-meaning interpreters continually increased the apparition's age, with estimates ranging between 14 and 20. Priestly and pious opinion preferred the convention of Mary at the time of the Annunciation, and hence advanced the age to between the 15th and 17th year. But do any of us picture Our Lady of Lourdes as being 12 years old and under 5 feet tall? I would guess no. And why is that? The answer is art. Art got us. Our conception of the Immaculate Conception of Lourdes is probably based on the statue by the Lyonnais sculptor Joseph Fabiche that was erected in the Massa Biel grotto in 1864, and that has become the standard representation of the Virgin of Lourdes. Harris notes that Fabiche's statue angered Bernadette considerably by being both too big and too old. Or maybe your impression of Our Lady of Lourdes resembles that of the 19th century painting by the Catholic artist Justin Pibou, which looks uncannily how Our Lady of Lourdes would come to be depicted in the classic film Song of Bernadette. But maybe we can forgive Justin Pibou for taking such artistic license in painting Our Lady, given the fact that the experience later moved him to discover his own vocation and to become a priest. Art got him. The last example is from very recent history. A few months ago, on the Italian version of the television program The Voice, religious sister Christina Scuccia appeared performing Alicia Keys' hit song, No One. I don't watch TV, but I'm told this. The way the show works is that the four rather daunting-looking judges sit in big, mechanized swivel chairs with their backs to the performer. So unseen to the judges, the artist steps on stage, and his or her performance manages to be dazzling enough to get a judge's attention. That judge will then hit a big button which causes the chair to spin around. Well, the young woman singing so enamored one of the judges, the 41-year-old Italian rapper J. Axe, that he immediately hit his button, and the other three judges quickly followed suit. Suddenly, face to face with the amazing talent, all the judges were flabbergasted to discover that this amazing voice belonged to an Ursuline sister of the Holy Family in full habit. For me, the miraculous power of art is captured in the confession made by the rapper J. Axe. This totally tattooed man said to Sister Christina, "If I had found you at Mass, I would always be in church." And as Father Alejandro Diaz, a priest at the Pontifical Council for the New Evangelization, said this month, what Sister Christina has done can be considered going out to the peripheries because she has gone to a different stage to bear witness to her choice of life. And in this sense, I think she has hit the target. The Holy Spirit doesn't have only one method for bringing people close to Christ. There are many ways to evangelize, and Sister Christina has shown us one of them. Father Diaz went on to say that Sister Christina's example shows that it is possible to be a witness to the faith in the media and through art. Music can be a channel for speaking of God and conveying an explicit message based on the gospel. And as he says, and it is certainly one of the many ways through which we can bring the person of Jesus to the people. To help achieve all this, I would offer just one simple proposal. And here I am drawing from the well springs of Dominican tradition. I think it's time that the Church reinstate the Inquisition. The original Inquisition was ordered to orthodoxy. The new Inquisition will be ordered to aesthetics. Maybe when it's all said and done, it just boils down to something Leon Blois once said of himself. I am a sort of madman dreaming of beauty. But in the course of Magnificat's 16 years of existence, I know I have encountered many similar madmen and madwomen. So it seems reasonable to keep dreaming about the beauty that will save the world and to press on in the mission of Magnificat, bolstered by the encouragement urged by St. John Paul II. Beauty makes one feel the beginning of fulfillment and seems to whisper to us, you will not be unhappy. The desire of your heart will be fulfilled. What is more, it is already being fulfilled. Thank you, and God bless you.
Wow, Father Peter, our view of Dominicans is vastly improved. Thank you so very, very much for that. But what I do want to say, though, is that was really just a splendid, splendid rendition of how beauty has power over us. And, coming myself from a little bit of a background of mathematics and logic, I have to say, you have the illusion of power sometimes in those disciplines. Yet beauty is a whole different realm. It just draws us into itself in that appreciation that stands before it, that just keeps drawing us closer and closer and closer, not only to truth itself and goodness itself, not only to God, but to Jesus Christ. And you have so beautifully stated it for us today. Thank you very, very much, Father Peter Cameron.